Hi guys, what's up? Welcome back to another video. Today you join me in my 2006 Volvo S60 T5. Now this is a car I bought as a temporary daily just to kind of see me through until I decided what I wanted to do. I tend to do this, like I finish a kind of a finance or a lease on a car or something like that, and I can't really decide what I want to do, so I buy something cheap to tide me over, and I always end up bonding with it and falling in love with it a little bit, and that's exactly what's happened with this Volvo. Before we begin, it's important that you get a good deal on a used car by doing a car history check, and Car Vertical is the perfect place to do so. It's as simple as popping in a reg, and as soon as you do that, Car Vertical is going to do a history check across lots of different countries for lots of different things. Car Vertical shows you at a glance whether the car has had any mileage rollbacks, been stolen anywhere in the world, had any outstanding finance, or been involved in an accident, as well as showing you specifications and equipment fitted to the car, and also a checklist of things to look out for when you're buying. If we look at the photos uploaded, we can see that this car has been listed for sale fairly recently and looks pretty good. But if we scroll up a little bit further, we can see that at some stage this car has been involved in a pretty serious shunt. It also shows any spotted activity, like when the car had a number plate change or when it had an MOT, as well as been involved in any accidents. And the stolen vehicle check checks databases all across the world, so make sure that you don't get shunted when buying a new car. Check out my Car Vertical affiliate link in the description below for your 10% discount. Now this particular Volvo is the 260 T5, the 2.4. Now there's a few engines that you could get in these in the production run, which was kind of in the early 2000s, and this particular one is the most desirable. So it's a 260 horsepower 5-cylinder turbo petrol. You could get some 5-cylinder diesels as well, which have a lot of torque, and you can also get some naturally aspirated 5-cylinders, and the full fat R version came with 300 horsepower all-wheel drive and a 2.5 litre turbo 5-cylinder. But this one is more desirable because the higher capacity was actually just an increase in bore size, which meant that actually the cylinder walls were a little bit thinner on those higher capacity models. So you'll find that this is the more desirable car when it comes to modification because it can take a little bit more thrashing. So this particular one is a pretty desirable spec as well. So it's in sapphire black metallic, which is like a off bluish dark black metallic paint, which is really nice, and it's got the BBS Nebula split alloy rims from factory and the sunroof, which was an option as well. Overall it just looks really nice in this package. I've always been after one of these cars. It's one of those bucket list cars really, but it's nothing particularly special, but I just really have always loved the look of them, so I always wanted to try one out, and this is the exact spec that I was after. Now unfortunately this one is mated to a 5-speed torque converter gearbox, which is very lazy round town. It drops the revs, it's really slushy between the gears. There is a manual mode which overrides it and holds the gears, which you can control sequentially using the shifter down here, but it's still very slow to shift. I wouldn't recommend it. But a manual was optional, known as the space ball, and that is probably the rarest that you can find. Now in the early to mid 2000s, these were desirable cars. They were fast and luxurious, and they look cool on the road as well. If one of these pulled up outside your house in 2006, you'd think, oh crikey, it's the Rozzers. These were everywhere as police interceptors in that era, whether they were unmarked or whether they were in full livery. TR Hamza bought an ex-police version, which was an interceptor. They used the Spaceball manuals. A lot of them used the V70 estates. Just really cool things. But I'm really not sure how they got away with it, because there is absolutely no legroom in the back. For a car of this size, the legroom in the back is absolutely unacceptable. If you were an amputee, then it would be absolutely fine, or if you were about 6, maybe. But for full-size adults and crims, no, I really don't see what they were doing. What I do know though is the police ones were modified with the suspension from the diesel model, which was designed to support the higher weight of the car, so that when they had a full load it would just handle and perform a little bit better. Overall the ride is quite soft. This one's fitted with the adaptive 4C suspension, which was an optional extra as part of a performance package, which also included some progressive power steering. And it's got a comfort mode and a sport mode, and the sport mode really does firm it up. It was quite an early version of adaptive dampers, but it does really work. I tend to drive the car mostly in its comfort setting, and it is kind of soft and squishy, but it still holds in the bends. But the sport mode does definitely firm it up a little bit. But saying that, it's a bit of a weird setup with the dampers because they do feel a little bit harsh over bumps. It feels very soft when you're floating along, but then if you hit a pothole or something, it's a bit of a jolt, which is, yeah, a bit of a strange setup really, but I think that contributes to how this car handles overall. Let's punch it. What a sound. The 5-cylinder sound gets me every time. This has got a completely standard exhaust on it, so it doesn't sound crazy. If I was to keep this car, I'd probably want to modify it with a bit of an exhaust. You can hear, though, the wind noise in here, or the tyre noise, can be a little bit excessive. That's the only thing that I have as a complaint about the inside of the cabin, because kind of for a mid-size executive car at the time, something like a BMW or a Lexus is much more refined. And also the interior kind of lets this down in terms of the era it was in. This one's in quite a nice spec, so it's got black leather with the aluminium trim, whereas of course you could get it with beige and wood and all the rest of it. But this one does look quite nice, and I do like the button layout. I mean, this one's got the uprated stereo in it, which has Dolby Pro logic. It's got like a subwoofer built in. It does sound really good for the time. It's got a hilarious mobile phone built into the dash as well, which actually has a SIM card in it. I've got no idea what my phone number is for this car, but there we are. Climate controls are okay as well, kind of okay for the era. It's got dual zone with manual controls on, which is absolutely fine. It's got an automatic setting, and it all makes sense. The layout's okay. Everything feels quite nice as well. Everything feels quite solid and well built in comparison to some of the other cars of the time period that I've driven. But yeah, overall the design is just a little bit old-fashioned for the time. Like, step into something like a Lexus GS or a 5 Series of the same age, and you'll probably feel a little bit more at home. The interior illumination is like a sort of a washed out green. It's quite nice, but it's not as vivid as the green you find in a Saab of the same era. But yeah, being a Swedish car, being a Volvo, it's programmed for the lights to stay on all the time, and I can't see them during the day, they're so dim. The actual layout of the dashboard is quite nice, the clocks look okay, and also you've got a very basic check control system, which is controlled on the indicator stalk, and you can see things like MPG, range, and your mileage and all that kind of thing. If there's any messages to do with bulbs being out, service due, all that kind of thing. So there's a little bit of information there for you to play around with. The seats themselves are quite comfortable as well, so you'll find that, I mean, I've not got much bolstering, so going around this roundabout at some pace, you don't feel like you're being gripped in that much, but it's designed to be a comfortable, luxurious car. And yeah, it's got electric adjustment, it's got sort of a bit of lumbar, adjustable tilt on the thigh support, and they're heated as well, although the heating is very slow. Yeah, the Swedes, they know how to make a great chair in a car. I think the Saab seats are some of the best I've ever sat in a car for long distance driving. And these are a bit too soft, I think. They're a bit more like sofas. You can see just looking at them, they're a bit like your armchair at home. And that's what this is like. When people ask me what this is like to drive, I say it's basically like someone strapped a jet engine to your living room. It's just a big wafty car with a surge of power, very lazy, very comfortable. But again, the suspension isn't quite forgiving enough to make this a luxury experience. I do think, in general, the space in the back is completely unforgivable for the size of this car, but the boot is definitely big enough for anything you want to chuck at it, really. Obviously, it's quite impractical being a saloon and the size of the opening and that kind of thing, but overall there's loads of space in there. You can fit quite a lot, and there's also your battery well back there, so it accommodates a massive battery and a spare tyre and all the rest of it. So it's very lazy just cruising along at this speed. If I absolutely kick down though, it will kick in and thrash. So it's quite a nice surge of power there. I do love having the sunroof, but it does whistle like mad, which is really annoying. But that's the price you pay, unfortunately. And the economy, well, that's a really sore point as well. I've been averaging, with mixed driving, motorway and round town, 23 miles per gallon. Yeah, 90 quid of fuel at the moment in this gets me less than 300 miles. It's quite appalling. I know it's quick, but it's not quick and nippy enough for that. It's just the nature of the beast, I'm afraid. The most I've got out of it is about 40 on the motorway, but that was driving like Miss Daisy on about a 300-mile trip. Right, I've got it in its sport setting on the suspension now, and I'm going to go around this roundabout, and I'm going to exit with some pace and demonstrate one of the big flaws of this car, which is got some crazy wheel spin there. The traction control was not having it. But the big problem with this car is it grips and grips and grips and then suddenly doesn't. And when I say suddenly doesn't, I mean absolutely catastrophic understeer. Like, it just gets to a point and just completely washes out on you. And the most worrying thing about the whole thing is if you're going around a corner, even if it's cornering quite flat, and then you hit a bump in the road or like a pothole, all of a sudden the whole chassis becomes really unsettled, and it just feels really worrying. It feels like you've not got much idea of what's going on. Being hydraulic steering, you do get kind of a little bit of texture through, but overall it's very, very soft, a very slow steering rack, and overall there's not much in terms of feedback. You get just a bit of texture, but not much feedback on what the wheels are actually doing, and it's very soft. It's nothing like a BMW at all. And I think my biggest gripe with the car overall with the handling is the turning circle. It is absolutely abysmal. One of the worst cars I've ever driven in terms of turning circle, and that's not even an exaggeration. People have actually made memes about how bad this car is around car parks. I actually have gone round car parks like multi-stories and things like that, and had cars bib me because they think I'm just not steering enough. But I'm on full lock, and it takes a good few turns of the wheel as well. So you're flapping your hands around and nothing's really happening. And it's actually got to the point where I actively avoid going to some places because I know that this is going to be a nightmare to manoeuvre. But I don't suppose that people were that bothered in the early 2000s when it sounded like this and went like this. I'm not saying it's a dreadful experience to drive. It's just not quite one or the other. It's not a sporty experience. It can't be. It's too unsettled. But it's also not too luxurious either, because even though I'm sitting in an absolute armchair, I still feel as though I can't enjoy the comfort and refinement too much because of the excessive noise in here. You can see now that I've come to a stop, you can see just how quiet it is in here compared to when I'm actually on a roll. I mean, the conditions aren't great out right now, but yeah, I just don't think it's quite the luxury experience you'd be going for if you're looking for something really refined. I'd say go for something like a Lexus GS300 instead, because that's going to be way better. Brakes aren't bad, to be fair, but you can upgrade these with the XC90 front brakes, and the R did have better Brembo setup as well. So yeah, I would definitely recommend it because it's a big heavy car, and of course yeah, you might get yourself into a little bit of trouble if you're not careful. Let's stamp on it here. I just wish I had this in a manual to try it out, because I think it would be a really cool thing. Overall, it's not been too bad in the ice, because it's got a winter mode on this automatic gearbox, which does make things a little bit easier. And even though this is a front-wheel drive car, obviously built for Swedish roads where they have a lot of this sort of weather, the car kind of knows how to handle it. So if I've got in trouble, I've just turned the traction control off and floored it and managed to get myself out of it.
Giving it the big one.
Mate, here we go.
Oh! Come on the Volvo!
Look at the opposite lock I've got on, boys.
Look at that! Look at that!
Come on! What a machine! Right, let's do a standing start. I'm going to crack the windows a little bit, so there will be a little bit of wind noise, but I just want you to hear it and see where we get. So let's just punch it. Oh, no, let's not. Got a bit of ice here. There we go. Gradual start. It does sound alright, even with this standard exhaust on it. They sound awesome when they're opened up. And this engine is pretty much the same engine that was shared with the Ford Focus ST of the same sort of age. You know, the one that you always see in Tangerine Scream, that one, that's got a 5-part that was mated to a manual, and this is effectively the same motor. So you can get decent power out of them, and they do sound the part, even though they are slightly lazy to rev, which obviously isn't helped by this torque converter gearbox, which is probably sapping a lot of the power out of this car. An half go when you punch it. For such an old car as well, people are always surprised by it. It's good fun, but it's just not the best handling thing in the world, because it's big, heavy, and the chassis just kind of really can't cope with some of the conditions you throw at it. But if you're just cruising around and you just want to occasionally do that and listen to that soundtrack, then yeah, you're gonna have a smile on your face like I've got right now. So overall then, whilst this isn't the most ideal car to run day to day, I'm glad I got to experience it. And you know what, I think if I had a manual one, I'd probably put some time into modding it and keeping it and messing around with it, because I think these look really cool, especially lowered a little bit, even on these standard wheels. They look great, they sound great. There's just something really cool about them, in my opinion anyway, even though some people just say, oh, it's a bit of an old man's car. I don't see it that way. I see it as a bit of a classic in the making, and they're definitely more desirable now. It's almost impossible to find them in good condition with a T5 so I'm sure I'll get back what I paid and then some, even though this isn't in the best condition in the whole world. And yeah, I'm just really glad that I got to experience it. It's no Audi RS3, but it sounds cool, it does go, and I've enjoyed my time with it, and I've enjoyed bonding with it. I imagine that if you were to scrap the suspension setup and put it on coilovers, it would probably handle quite a lot better as well. I'd have to reserve judgment, but the steering is a bit too slow for me to think of it as a true performance car. But there we have it, guys. That is my 2006 S60 T5. I've had a blast in this thing, and I really enjoy Swedish cars. I really loved my Saab. It's one of the nicest cars I've had, I think, in terms of bonding experiences. And this has been great fun as well. Even though it's not for me as a daily driver forever, I've still thoroughly enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed getting to know it. So thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for the support this year. It's been absolutely amazing. The channel is growing at a more rapid pace every day, and I'm really grateful for the support and the interaction in the comments. So thank you guys so much. I hope you have a good Christmas, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye. It's the understeer.